Okay, hello and good morning. Today we're going to do a little more GoPro 11 mini slow motion testing. So we're going to talk about slow-mo and how to record in a frame rate that will give you different slow-mo abilities, okay? So first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run right through here, okay? I'm going to do the exact same speed of my run, and I'm going to shoot it in different frame rates and show you the difference between shooting in 30 frames a second, 60 frames a second, 120 frames a second, and 240 frames a second. So that's what we're going to do today. That's going to be our test. And we'll just look at those 4 different options. That's the only 4 options you really have on a GoPro. And that's on any of them. On the GoPro 11 mini, on the GoPro 11, on the GoPro 12, and on the GoPro 13 that just came out last week. There are a couple new features on the GoPro 13. Like you can now do 5.3K, 120 seconds, 120 frames for 15 seconds. That's something new they've done. So the max on these cameras, on the 11 and the 12, is 5.3K at 60 frames a second. So that's where the limitations. The better GoPros, the higher up they go. That's what we're hoping for in the future, is to see higher frame rates, higher resolutions, and all that. But currently, there's really very little difference between the 11 and the 13 that just came out. So anyway, let's do a run right here. 30 frames a second, 5.3K is what I'm recording in. And I will show you that this, again, 30 frames a second cannot be slowed down. That's just real-time footage. So we're going to start with that, though, just to get a baseline of the speed that I'm going to run this little jog in. And again, I'm going to try to run the exact same speed each time in each one of these clips that I'm going to shoot. Okay, here we go. 5.3K, 30 frames a second. Okay, now we're going to shoot 5.3K, 60 frames a second, slowed down to 50%, because that's the max you can slow down footage when recording at 60 frames a second. If you slow it down slower than 50%, the footage will start becoming jittery, and you'll see that. So when you're slowing it down in post in the GoPro Quick app or on the computer in a different software or whatever, only slow it down 50% if you're recording at 60 frames a second. Here we go, 5.3K, 60 frames a second. Okay, now in order to shoot 120 frames a second, which is what we're shooting right now, we have to bump the resolution down from 5.3K down to 4K. So now we're recording at 4K, 120 frames a second, and we can slow this footage down all the way down to 25% playback. Anything lower than 25% playback is going to become choppy, so you only want to slow it down to 25%. Again, 60 frames a second down to 50%, 120 frames a second can go down to 25%. Let's do it. Okay, and last but not least, 2K at 240 frames a second. So this, we can go all the way down to 10% playback. So now we're going to shoot. Again, I had to go down in resolution, so this image is going to be not as high quality as a 4K or a 5.3K. It's going to be a little less quality, but a little more frames per second. Okay, that's the trade-off you have to do when thinking about slow-mo shots. Okay, so again, 2K, 240 frames a second, and we'll slow it down to 10% playback. Okay, so I hope this is going to be a good test and a good example of frames per second and what that means when it comes to shooting in slow motion. Okay, right now I'm back to recording at 5.3K, 30 frames a second, And the reason is because again, 30 frames is a lot less memory going on the memory card versus 60 frames versus 120 frames, you know, all that. So I only shoot in those high resolutions, 120 or 240, for specific purposes. So if I know that it's going to be a shot that I want to really try to slow down, then I'll try to, you know, just get that shot in slow motion. Then normally I'm going to shoot in 30 frames a second if I'm just talking to the camera, that kind of thing typically. Or if it's some kind of action, you know, where I may want to slow it down just a little bit, or just to get smoother playback, I'll shoot at 60 frames a second. I would say that I typically shoot 60 frames a second more than I do anything else. That's just my go-to kinda. And all of these shots just now were in wide. I'm even recording in wide right now. So, but anyway, hopefully this is informative information. And until the next video, let's go.